The whole purpose of this today is to look at the Enterprise PDM system and how it can handle some of the information related to AutoCAD files. And really, when I say AutoCAD files, I'm talking about DWG files. So I don't actually have AutoCAD installed on my computer, but what I do have is a DWG drawing product called DraftSite. DraftSite is a product that Dassault Systems came out with recently that's essentially out there to help you reduce independence on AutoCAD. It's a free tool, free to download, and it's production ready. So their hope is that you'll download that and you won't have to continue spending maintenance money with AutoCAD. Just another thing to help out their SOLIDWORKS users and their customer base. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a DWG file that I have on my desktop here. So this is just a simple drawing of a component. Those of you who use AutoCAD, this probably looks fairly familiar to you. I myself am not an AutoCAD user, but I understand the commands that I need to work with inside the Enterprise PDM pane to make sure that some of this information translates across to the system. So for those of you who don't know, Enterprise PDM is the data management tool of choice for SOLIDWORKS users. It's a place where you can store your SOLIDWORKS files, your Word docs, your AutoCAD drawings, whatever else you may need controlled access to. And so inside the Enterprise PDM system, it's possible to pull information off of these drawings that you have so that you can see it inside the system and you can search it inside the system. The only thing is you have to set it up the right way so that it knows where to look. And in AutoCAD files and DWG files, there's a very particular method for doing this. So that's what I want to talk about here. Now, if I go over into the lower corner of this drawing, you can see that we've basically got a title block, right? And this title block has some information in it. You know, it's got the title, maybe a description. It happens to have a drawing number right there. So a couple of pieces of information that are important to us. There's also some fields that are empty right now. You can see like a checker and a checked date field, as well as a revision field that are blank, right? And so the hope here is that we can actually extract this information into Enterprise PDM so that you don't have to duplicate your data entry. Now the way that this drawing is set up right now, these are all just lines. You know, I could select them individually as well as notes, right? So this is just a standard AutoCAD DWG type note here. And that's fine if you're not trying to extract information from the file, but if you do want to extract information from the file, you have to turn these into what the DWG community calls blocks. So block is basically a grouping of entities, and when you group entities into a block, the information that's stored within those is stored in a very specific location in the file, and you get to actually label that location so that we can extract it later. Just 1 second, I've got one person who says he can't hear the webinar, so give me 2 seconds here. I'm going to see if I can get him on par with everybody else. Okay, so moving forward here, like I said, the way that this is set up is it's just notes in the DWG file, and we need to really translate that into blocks and what they call block attributes. Before I do that though, I actually want to put this file into the Enterprise PDM system just so that you guys can see what I'm talking about in terms of extracting information and what we're missing by not having these block attributes set up properly. So Enterprise PDM is really cool in that it's all Windows Explorer based. So to get this thing from my desktop into the Enterprise PDM tool, I could drag and drop it, I could copy and paste it, or I could just do a save as, right? And so when I do a save as, I'm going to come to my C drive, I'm going to browse into my Enterprise PDM vault, and I'm probably going to store this in like a manufacturing folder for the time being. We'll say that it fits right in there. Maybe this is a release drawing, or maybe I'll just keep it at the top level, the manufacturing folder. Okay, so we're going to call it 301.830.dwg. That all looks good to me, and we'll save it inside the system. Now if I minimize this for a second and actually go through Windows Explorer and look at our vault, we're going to see a couple things related to this file inside the vault. So the first thing that you see is the vault is telling me the file is checked out by the admin. That is the particular user that I am logged in as right now. If this was anybody else in your company, this really helps out in terms of collaboration. You're going to essentially know who's working on each file. This also prevents two people from making changes to the same file at the same time. So you're not going to get those overwriting wars that you sometimes have when you're using server environments. If you select the file and you go down to the bottom, what you're going to see is things like this data card, right? This data card is the area where we're hoping to extract that information from. So instead of having to go into the file and actually physically look at the title block to know the material and the description and the drawing number and things like that, I'd prefer to be able to look at it on this data card without having to open the file. And so to get that information pulled out, we have to go and set up a few hooks inside the Enterprise PDM system. So that's what we really want to look at. A couple other things here. You do have a preview of the file. So once the DWG file is stored in Enterprise PDM, you'll have full previewing capabilities of that file. You can zoom in, zoom out. So as long as you have access to the vault, you're going to be able to see the information here without much trouble. Okay, so let's go into this and let's look at the steps required to actually add these types of block attributes onto the file. So here you can see I've gone back into the DWG file, and the first thing I need to do is get rid of the notes. Okay, so I'm going to take this note that says yoke saw pivot, that's the title, and I'm going to delete that. What I'm going to add in place of that is what we call a block attribute. Now, if you're using AutoCAD, the drop-down menus or the command names may be slightly different, but the overall process is essentially the same. So in my case, in this draft site tool, I come to the draw menu, I have an area for block, and then I'll be able to define block attributes. So we'll grab that, and I'm going to give this a name. So I'm tagging this block attribute so that I can come back and get it later. And I want to tag this with something like, I'll call it drawing title. Okay, very clear so that I know when I come back to this later exactly what it is. We'll give it a default value, which is going to be yoke slash saw pivot, just like it was before. Okay, and I also will leave all the rest of these things where they are right now, except I'm going to specify the insertion point. So I can come right here and choose my little selection tool, choose where I'd like this note to go, and hit the OK button. And you notice what happens here is that it places the note in terms of the name that we gave it and not the value. And that's okay. If you see this right away, don't be worried about that, because once we transform this whole thing into a block, you'll see the value replace the name of the field essentially. So I'm going to do this with a couple more things, right? We've got our title. I'll probably refer to that as a description on the data card. We're going to go out here, I'm going to delete drawing number, and we're going to come back and add another one of those. So again, draw, block, define block attributes. I'll call this one number, and that was SW-201830. 201830. Okay, and we'll specify the insertion area right here and hit OK. Again, it's just showing his number, which is fine for the time being. And two more of these things that I want to do. So material, we've got a 6061 alloy. I'll put this in one more time. I'm sorry this is a little bit repetitive, but I want to go through and make sure that I get this all set up properly. 6061 alloy. Nothing wrong with a little bit of repetition, just helps us learn it. And then the last thing I want to do is put in a field where no field actually is right now, so this revision field. I'd actually like the Enterprise PDM system to be able to control that revision and write to that field for me when the document gets released. So we're going to put in one more time a block attribute there. I'll call it revision. We'll give it a default value of nothing since it has no revision right now. And we'll specify the insertion point right there. Okay, so that all looks fairly good to me for the time being. I'm going to go ahead and save this file to make sure I don't lose the changes that I have right now. So the next step is that I have to turn this whole area into a block. As I've defined those block attributes, I now want to group everything together and say that it is one solid block inside the tool. So to do that, I'm just going to do a Windows select of the entities that I'd like to turn into a block. Okay, we'll make sure that everything that's of importance to us here has been selected. Once that happens, you go to the Draw menu again, Block, and this time you're just going to use the Define command, and we're going to turn this whole thing into a block. So when defining a block, you're going to give it a name, and I'll actually call this Title Block. Fairly intuitive. I want to make sure that, again, I can reference back to this later on. Okay, we could give it a description if we want to, but I'm not going to worry about that. There are, however, two very important options inside this draft site tool that I need to make sure I select. So again, this may be very similar inside AutoCAD. The commands may be a little bit different, but the two things you want to really focus on is this first option, allow block to explode. If you do not have that option selected, what happens is those block attributes get turned into notes. And we don't want them to get turned into notes. We want them to be able to stay as block attributes so that they can continue to change throughout this process. So as long as we leave the option to allow the block to explode, we're going to ensure that that can happen. The other thing that we want to do is convert to a block. We want this to be really locked together so that if you move one entity, all the other entities move essentially. So we need to choose this option, convert to block, to make sure that that happens. So we'll go ahead and hit OK on that. And you'll notice now when you do that, that a little screen pops up telling you the block attributes that you have inside this block. So we've got 4, and 3 of them happen to have values right now. If you don't get this screen or something very similar to that, it's because you didn't allow the block to continue to explode, and those entities have become notes. So you need to see a screen like this to understand that you define those attributes in that block correctly. So we'll hit OK. There's our block, and you notice now that if I select one line, it selects the entire block. And what's cool about this is I can double click on the block and it will bring back up that edit block attribute values. So instead of having to go note by note and update these things, I can actually update that through one screen inside my tool. It's very similar to setting up custom properties in a SOLIDWORKS drawing, which I'm sure most of you guys are probably familiar with. So even if you're not going to use it inside the Enterprise PDM system, it's nice to be able to set it up this way so that you can fill things in a bit more quickly. Right now I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go back to our Windows Explorer window, and we're going to go back to the data card of that file and see if anything's happened. Right, so really, again, none of these things are filled in quite yet. Right, and that's because we have one last step. So we've set the information up inside the DWG file now, but Enterprise still doesn't know where to pull that information from. So we have to go in there and we have to tell it. And so we're interested in a couple things: drawing number, the description, the material, and the revision. So we need to go into the Enterprise PDM system and actually set it up to pull this information. So what I'm going to do is bring up the Enterprise PDM admin tool. And because my data card already has those fields on it, I don't have to worry about the data card very much. What I do have to worry about is those variables. So those fields that we have on the data card, we call those variables. And those variables are what need to be told where to pull that information from outside of AutoCAD. So if we go to the variables node over here inside the admin tool, I can right click on that and hit the open button. And I'm going to get a list of all the variables I have in the software. So I'm interested in a couple of these. The first one is going to be number. Right? So if I scroll down to number, we can see over in the right hand side that we have this list of things called attributes. Okay? And you can see that the attributes have different block names and different attribute names, as well as different extensions that they apply to. This is where those naming conventions that we used when defining the block and the attribute come into play. So there's one already that's called DWG title block drawing number that applies to DWG, DXF, and DWT files. Unfortunately, our block was not named that, and our attribute was not named that. So we need to provide an additional definition here. So we'll hit the button that says New Attribute, and our block name was title block. When we made the whole big group of fields into one block, we named that title block. And before that, when we placed the attribute, we made the attribute number. Okay, so we'll set that up with the block name and the attribute name. And we're going to go through here and make sure that it's pointing to the DWG file type. And that's how we have to set it up for the rest of those properties. So fairly self-explanatory for the rest of these. We'll go to revision next. And the same kind of thing happens in revision here. We'll do a new attribute. It's in title block. It was called revision. And it applies to the DWG files. Okay, two more to set up. Material. Same thing. New attribute. Title block. Material. And DWG. And then the last one is description. Okay, so in description, the block name is still title block because they're all in that same group. However, the attribute name we gave it was drawing title. So keep in mind here that the attribute name does not have to match the variable name. They can be completely different so long as you remember what the names of these things are. And one more time, we're going to give it the DWG file extension. And since I got all four variables mapped now, I'm going to hit OK. So we'll close out on our admin tool, and I'm going to bring Windows Explorer back up. And what I expect to see now when I refresh my screen is that it pulls some of that information off. So here now we have the drawing number, the description, and the material exactly like we were hoping to get. The revision isn't filled in, but remember we left revision blank. So this is exactly what I expected to happen. And with this set up now, every time I put in a DWG file, my DWG file should use a template that is similar. So every DWG file should now pull from the same information, and I don't have to do this duplicate file entry or data entry that we're trying to avoid. So that all looks pretty good to me. What I'm going to do now is just save this file one more time, and I'm going to check it into the vault. So checking it into the vault simply means that I'm going to release ownership of it. I don't need to be making any more changes to it because the changes I was going to make are done. So I'm going to make it available to access for anyone else in the system. And the reason I'm doing this is that I want to pass this file up through a workflow. And you know, before I do that actually, maybe I should show something else. Let me check this file back out for just a minute. I should mention to you guys that when you set up the link between the block attributes and the Enterprise PDM system, it's not a one-way link. It will pull information from AutoCAD to Enterprise, or if I change the information here in the data card, it will actually push that information back to Enterprise. So if I needed to make quick changes to this drawing, I could actually come through here and say, you know what? The description is that it's just going to be a yoke pivot, and I changed my mind on the 6061 alloy. I want to make this just out of steel or something like that. Well, that's a field I actually can't change based on my data card. Let me set that up just really fast because I want to be able to change this and show you guys what's happening. So we log into the vault here. I'm just going to go make a change to my data card real quick. We're going to take that material field and make it non-read only so that we can change it. Okay. Pardon that little quick change. Okay, so we'll take this material field, we're going to change that to steel. So remember I changed the description and the material. If we were to go open that DWG file now, you're going to see those note fields have changed based on my input into the data card. So we've got yoke pivot instead of yoke saw pivot, and we've got steel instead of 6061 alloy. So that sort of two-way connection makes for the ability to do a lot of stuff without having to edit directly inside the editing tool. What that also means is you can set up things like these drawn by, checked by, approved by fields to fill in automatically through the system. And that's what we're going to do with this revision field. We've got a workflow inside Enterprise PDM which, you know, can sort of control things like a release process or an ECO process. So what's going to happen here is we're going to release this file, and when that file gets released, the PDM tool is going to stamp a revision on it, and that revision is going to fill in our title block so that we know this drawing is always showing the absolute latest revision. That's not something that's manually edited by a user. Okay, so let me close this one more time. I should also mention that the preview gets updated. So as soon as those changes are made, the preview gets updated. It's not like the file has to be saved and rechecked back in or anything like that. It's just an immediate update process for that metadata. So I'll check this file back in now. Give it a note. We can say changed properties of material. I'm adding a note in here because Enterprise has this really cool historical audit trail. I should probably show you that real quick. It's just a listing of who's done what, when they did it, and why they did it. And it gets attached to all files once they get placed in the vault. It's something that, if you have to go through some sort of audit, really helps out. So we'll close that, and I'm going to push this thing through. Now remember, I'm logged in as the admin, so typically what would happen is I would push this into a review state, someone else would review it and then approve it. But for time constraints here, because we want to get out a little bit quicker today than normal, we're going to just do this logged in as the admin. So I'm going to change the state of that file and submit it for approval. Again, this provides me with a screen where I can put a comment, something like please review. I could send out email notifications if I wanted someone to be notified through email that this task was awaiting them. And you can see the file will change state now into a pending approval state. So the last state here is to go through and we're going to say that we want to approve this. But as I'm thinking about this, I have one more thing inside the tool. Well, that's okay. We'll continue on the way we're working. So we'll right click, change state. The next step would be to approve. Obviously, I could kick it back if changes were required. This all depends on the design of your workflow. But this is where the revision is going to get stamped. So we give it a note, approved for production. Again, we could email, notify people. I've got it set up to double authenticate on my password since this is such a critical step. These are all options inside the system that you could make use of. But I'll hit OK here. And you'll see that revision A gets appended in the column. And if we go and look at the preview of the file, revision A gets filled in the title block, exactly how we anticipated this to happen. Now you could go look at the data card, get a Rev A2. You could set up all sorts of other automation tasks here. If you needed to save off a PDF of this file, that approval process could have written the revision and then generated a PDF of the drawing if you needed it to. So you have so many automation capabilities in the background on this tool. And the whole thing is to take a little bit of the human element out. You know, somebody forgot to fill in the title block. Well, we don't have to worry about this. We forgot to create a PDF. Well, you don't have to worry about that. So it's just helping you be more effective as a company. Now there are two more things that I want to show in here because they're very important. So for those of you who are familiar with the server side of things, there's this tool that Windows supplies called the indexing server. Okay, and what the indexing server does is it goes through files and it breaks down their content and stores that content. What's nice about Enterprise PDM is that it can make use of that indexed content through searches. So for instance, I've got something in here, it's just a regular Word document. Okay, I'm going to go grab it up real quick just so you guys can see it. Right, so I've got a couple Word docs in here. This one I'm going to turn on the preview. Just a little file we were talking about, what we were going to put on our website here. And what's cool about this indexing server searching the content is that I can search the content. So you pick any sort of sentence in here, right? How about by storing all your files in one location, right? I can actually run a search on that sentence and it will show me every document that has that sentence in it. So for instance, I'm going to bring up our Enterprise PDM searching interface for a second. Okay, and if we switch over to this content tab, that's where we're going to be able to search the content of those files. So I forget exactly what sentence I was looking at. By storing all your files, okay? I'm going to search on that clip. By storing all your files. So when I hit search, I expect that to return that Word document for me. So I can know that somewhere in that Word document, that sentence, that grouping of characters exists. Okay? Now, out of the box, the indexing server does this for typical Microsoft documents, Word docs, Excels, PowerPoints, that kind of stuff. But there's these really great things out on the internet called iFilters. And iFilters are plugins to this indexing service for specific file types. So when you install SOLIDWORKS, you actually get a SOLIDWORKS iFilter that gets installed on the background, so you can index SOLIDWORKS content. And that's really cool because if you have something like a SOLIDWORKS drawing, you could actually search for the notes that exist on that SOLIDWORKS drawing. So let me come through here. I'm going to open up a SOLIDWORKS drawing for a second. Okay, we'll scroll down, pull some drawings, look at the preview. I'm going to choose something on here. Oh yeah, this is great, right? So here we've got a note that says surface finish is as cast. So maybe I want to go through my vault and I want to look for all drawings that have this as cast verbiage on them. Now that's not something that's getting pulled into the data card because it's just a regular note. It's not a property or an attribute or anything. But because we have the indexing server and this content search turned on, it goes through, it finds that information through the index, and it allows us to search it. So we'll search the entire top level of the vault. I want to search the content for as cast, and we'll hit search on there. Right? So I actually have a couple drawings that have that on there. I believe this was the one that we were looking at before. And this actually kind of gives a, oh no, it was a SOLIDWORKS drawing, this one, right? That actually kind of gives away a little bit what I was really going to show you guys is that there is a DWG specific iFilter. You notice that those DWG files, including the one that I just put in the vault, actually show up here. So if we were to look at this DWG file I just put in the vault, it says as cast in the notes. So we can find that through our AutoCAD files, and this is great. If you have legacy AutoCAD files and you don't want to go through there and convert all these things into block attributes, which, if you have a ton of legacy stuff, why would you? That's a huge task that you may not want to do. You can use this DWG iFilter to actually go into these regular standard notes and allow you to search on that kind of stuff, which is just fantastic, and I got this iFilter off the internet. If you go to Google, which is what I did, and you do a search for DWG iFilter, 2010. You're going to get a bunch of hits for these DWG eye filters. I went to this third link right here, which is iFilter Shop, and they actually have a couple downloads you can get. Most of these eye filters for some of the obscure file types like DWGs, you'll actually have to pay for, but they're just a couple $100, so in the long run, it's not really that bad. And you can see over here that this place has eye filters for many different types of files, PDF files, SHTML files, zip files. So you can search through those files for all sorts of data that you wouldn't necessarily be able to search for otherwise. Basically, that's what I wanted everybody to see today. I hope this has been helpful, and hopefully you can go back and replicate this. If there aren't any questions, I appreciate everybody joining the webinar today, and hopefully we'll see you in the future on another webinar.